YouTube, what's going on? Today we're going to be using Docker to set up our own microservice. And our microservice is going to be a way to just grab different news links from a news API that's public. And the simple way to get it is, or to use it, is to set up an account. Just grab your first name, your email, and then you can get a free API key, which can return any kind of news that's on the site. So the way we're going to do this is use Docker. This free way to use Docker. It's called Play with Docker, made by the same people, but really works out for small projects or if you're just testing things around. And so we'll hit start here. And so it brings us into our session where we're going to start by add new instance. And this kind of creates our environment for where we're going to set up our microservice. Now, since we're using the news API one, we're going to kind of go off based on this README here from the GitHub that we'll be cloning. And it's really just to follow through and make sure we don't miss any steps and make sure we set it up the right way. So the first thing we want to do is clone this GitHub repo. And we'll do that by throwing in here. For some reason my copy paste isn't working today, so I have to actually type out everything manually, but take it back to the 15th century. That's nice. We'll go through and put in github.com/hamp/news API workshop. And then we're going to throw in that clone statement, and then we're also going to throw in so that we change our directory to the news API workshop files that we just cloned in. So we're going to run that. That gets all done. It brings all our files in. We're able to check, see in this editor button here, it'll show what files we have here. So we have all these, and this .env.example one we're actually going to use on our next line here. And if we go back just to make sure, yep, we use CP, and then we want to grab that first file and then say make another one, a new file that kind of does the same type of thing, because the other one's just our example. So we're going to grab dot environment example, if I can spell right, and then do a space and dot environment. So we're making this new dot environment file to set up the environment of our microservice. So that's done. Now the next thing we could do is open the editor. And now this is how we're going to set up so that it pulls in the right news information. In our .env environment file that we just made, we have this new service API key, and then we have this news endpoint. So the API key is what we're going to replace. Actually, it's going to close this on me when I grab this, but we're going to replace that key with the key that we got from the news API. And this is a free API. You're able to use this on your own if you'd like to. It's actually really useful for setting up just small little demos like this. And so we'll go back into our file we made, and we're going to replace that with our key, and then we'll hit save. And now we have this news endpoint. We have to do something with this. So this is just our placeholder that came in, but we're going to go to where we set up our own by doing open port, and we'll throw in 4000 because that's where ours is made on. And we're going to see there was a problem loading the page. Now, right now, that doesn't matter because the actual microservice isn't spooled up yet. It actually isn't running at the moment. But all we care about now is this link, because this is going to be our endpoint. This is saying, all right, well, this is where microservice is going to be when we actually do run it. We'll go back, and we'll go back into the editor here. And now we copied our endpoint. Go back to that file, change the placeholder there to our actual endpoint. We'll save it. Now we're on the next step. So we set up our endpoint and we set up our API key. So now we're able to access the data, and we're giving the idea of where that news is going to go to. We'll come down here. So this was all the steps of putting in our API key and our endpoint. Now, as I'm pretty sure we should be able to just run it from where we're at. It's very simple to actually set up a web service. As you see that we've done 3 lines and changed 2 lines in the actual files themselves, and now we're gonna be able to run it. So we want to do docker -compose and then up. And now that should run. This may take a minute, but all this is really doing is setting up our microservices, building our server in the background. Now there it says step 1 of 6, and as it goes, it'll tell us kind of what it's doing right now. Just we're starting the node, we're building our server from node 12. It's doing all these other commands, so we're working directory. It's copying our package.json file. It's running yard install just to have all our files that we need. But while this is happening, I'll go over a little bit about what a microservice is. There is a link in the description to a dev.to post that talks about the difference between microservice architecture in a server or a monolith architecture, which has been primarily used in the past, but now the world's kind of moving to a microservice architecture, where a monolithic architecture is more of, it's kind of, so the way to visualize it is there's one big container, and everything that runs in that service or that application is within that container. The database, the UI, every endpoint that's sent back and forth, it's all run inside that same container. Where a microservice, you can throw up little services like this that only get run up and then they get canceled right after their task is done. So if somebody calls to do one action, it'll call up it'll run up microservices that are needed to make that action happen, and then once it's done, they'll close themselves. So it takes up a lot less space on servers. It makes it quicker because it doesn't have to load in the entire database and dig through everything you need. And every different service, all it needs to run is just the few microservices that are actually needed versus all of them that is done in a monolith. So our server is done. We're able to go to, if we hit this 80 here, because this is where all of our data that would show from the news that we just grabbed, it prints out everything. So the one good thing we can also do is this tag here. This tag is, if you'll notice from my past video about web components, it has a dash in the middle, which means it's a custom web component. So the news service is made in it's in the GitHub, but it's made to have this tag that can be changed to anything. So if we put Apple, it will give us different news links that relate to Apple. So as the first one here is Mac OS. This one down here is also about Mac OS. Chromebooks, kind of related in the tech world, and it can be changed to anything, but the main point is the web component here creates every single different link. It makes a new one every time. And that's kind of the purpose of this web component in this news API. After we grab the information from this news API, it grabs the JSON block that we got, parses it into all the information that we want. Now this is our actual microservice. This is what we made. This can be run up 20 different times. It can do all different types of things. You can make, the great thing about Docker is I can make more than one instance. I could do add new instance, and we have a whole nother microservice that we're able to make. We can have this one grab, and rather than news links, it could grab pictures about cats. I don't know, it could do whatever you really want it to. And if somebody wants to put out a thing, oh, give me 10 pictures of cats, run up a microservice that gives you 10 pictures of cats from the internet. And you can have that running alongside of while you have this news API running. So the other button here, as you'll see, is 4,000. We hit 80 last time, and that showed us our actual output from our microservice. But 4000 then comes to an error. And we look at that and we say, well, why this is the same link that we want, it's just at port 4000. Well, because this is when you get more into the server side of things. You have to put at the end GraphQL, and this actually pulls up a little UI for us about writing queries and different parts of our microservice that can get different information. So if we come over here to the right, we go to this Docs tab, and then it shows queries that can be run, and it gives this is our news that goes out and grabs the news from our API and brings it back to our service here. And we have article. So an article, this is just one article, and it's returning the author, the title, description, URL to image. And these are all the different parts of the article that we can grab from the API. Now, if we pop back into here, we can see there's an easy query just made here that we can throw in for this demo. And the great thing is you can put in test queries here. So this one's just doing a query for news, and the tag is Tesla. So how we changed back on our actual output, how we changed this tag to Apple, that's doing the same thing just in the background in our server. So the news, and it changed the tag to Tesla, and this is just gonna ask for the title, the author, and the URL. So if we hit play, we can see this is what it actually returns back to us. And then say we want the URL, but we also want a URL to our image. And we can see that's one of our types over here that we're able to grab. We can also grab content, source, published at, any of them. But we'll work with just adding the URL to image. And you'll see down here we have news, and then this is the first one, that's title, author, URL. The next one, title, author, URL. Same thing for the whole list. But if we run it again, now it adds URL to image to our retrieved information. So this is actually grabbing from the news API the title, the author, the URL, and the URL to an image of each news link. So that's kind of the basics when it comes to Docker. The main point of it is that we could have this microservice running. We could have this microservice running about grabbing pictures of cats from the internet. We could have another one running about, I don't know, different videos on how to tie your shoes. You can really make it do anything. And the actual practical application of this, outside of the nonsense examples of tying your shoes and grabbing pictures of cats, is how Netflix would use this, or Amazon would use this, or Uber. There's a lot of big companies now that are switching over to microservices, where I think Uber has 2,200 microservices alone in their own server's architecture. And they work as, say you wanted to order, say somebody just wants to order a ride from here to there. So it'll spin up microservices that are needed to make that ride happen. And then the second that ride ends, or somebody closes the app, or say they canceled the ride, that might spin up another microservice. But once that execution is done, once that task is done, it will close itself. So then that's just the same as if I hit close session here. This connection has been lost. And then it'll say your session expired, and then it's over. It's gone. And I can make it again. I can always go back in and make another one. And that's kind of how microservices work with big tech companies right now. They close themselves, and then they're just kept in the background. But when you actually need them, they spin themselves up, and then they give only the information you really need at that time, which saves load times, which saves server space, which has a lot more benefits. That if you go to that Dev2 article, I write pretty extensively about the different benefits to microservice over a monolithic architecture. Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. I'll see you in the next one.